Hello, everyone. Welcome to YouTube Masterclass, Coursera, USC, Calarts, and Harvard. This semester, summer semester, has had two classes for the class, the Western. Now, when I say the class, I mean the class as a whole, which is all 12 hours or 12 classes that you attend, and then you get credit for 3 credits, which that goes a long way because you have to pile up your credits depending upon what major you're getting. And if you're getting a film major, this class could come in handy for the skills you need to get through that you can get a credit for. USC and CalArts is one of the bonuses because I'm doing professor work for them, and I will probably always teach film at it. That it's been renewed on YouTube Masterclass that I can go for as long as I want, and I want to go for a long time. So let's just keep this going. But the point isn't to cheer for me or anything. It's that this film class, depending on your professor's look at it, not look at me, but look at your progress, then I'm not saying I'm not your professor for this class, but if you're taking the class, then you have to turn it in. You have to show the other professors to get credit for it too. So it doesn't guarantee credit. But for Coursera, they said I can be the professor and I can be the professor adjunct at CalArts, USC, and Harvard, which is the same thing as a professor. You're just not right there as a school. But it's because Coursera has hired me to be a professor with all these units built together. And then for all these units I had, like building up, it's from watching the program all the way from the beginning to the end. So if you're taking this lecture and it's on the Western, and you know that you have to watch all the way to the end, even if you're out of the room and you're just listening, because the background's not like the highlight. The highlight, it's my small room, but the cool thing is you can run this kind of like every day or every other day through your mind and kind of practice it. And the funny thing is I'm not asking for objections or subjections. I'm just saying that, like, it's been established for already uh, almost 3 years. It's been going, this master class. My 10 years coming up soon. I have it in the wraps, but I wouldn't blend any of my personal life into or private life into the personal and details of cinema. This isn't a gossip station. This isn't like me getting on here and say, like, oh, I knew him and he knew where. This is a class, so we have to take it as a college class, and some things get boring in it. Like, even this lecture is getting kind of boring. It's like, I'm not lecturing you on doing anything wrong. I'm just saying, if you think this is an easy grade, it's not. And I can guarantee that by the way some of you have reacted that have taken the classes. You've done really well on them. You said they were hard. You said they were tense. And some of you wish they hadn't taken it. And I was like trying to warn against that. So if you do just watch it on Coursera, as this possibly would have to connect to the Coursera mainframe, don't worry about that. Just make sure you turn it in to a professor, probably the one that got you into the bachelor's program wherever you're going, or if you're in grad school, then your teacher gets to deal with it however they want. But I'm telling you, you can get Coursera credit as well, so it does count towards those things at USC CalArts. And that just means is if you want to take a film class just for taking one, then this is ideal. But if you want to come in and be like, we're all gonna like be like a certain way so we can follow a role model, that's always been incorrect thinking. Because nobody's a role model, especially those that work so hard that they get tired and whatever else. So, it's not like here where each one of us are going with a psychological tool to judge a movie by. It's more of a psychological tool to judge the system of the dates of the time that these events happen, because that's not even psychology. It's like us looking back into the past, seeing how everybody is taking the cultural ideologies and the binding contracts that society has to live in, for whether you're free or slave, whatever that means. But in days of Hollywood classical cinema, it was interesting because as the world was falling apart and everything was becoming this vast wasteland, right? They always say that about some apocalyptic time. But Hollywood went straight from the silent films, like even where now Sunrise comes out at the end of Hollywood, and they went into the jazz singer with sound. And so Westerns made a big comeback. when there was sound. And so the thing is like every sound you get, every beat you get, every is in a movie now, and it was even in the Jazz Singer, but they had to eliminate it down to just music numbers because they were already talking about how they wanted to make a musical, but it was still silent, and they made silent like film music. Ernst Lubitsch made sound films that were musicals, but there are some silent films that are about music. And so they may not even have the score on that the composer, the silent film is about. And so the silent film is really advantageous even for stories about music. Now, check this out. Stories with music have the advantage of helping Westerns out because in the silent era, you're seeing all these horses gallop by. And it's like you wish you could hear the thrush of the horses go by. And like not only that, you don't really wish that because it's a cool soundtrack and it's a great movie. These movies about horsebacks, and that are all there's one that just goes on forever when we've talked about it. And I'm like, man, it'd be cool if we could like Black Stallionize that and have the sound of the horse be recorded, even if they're emphatic on changing details about how they deliver the sound. And what I mean by deliver is connect it back to the movie because you have to take strips of the movie that are like fine, even on video, and string your audio all the way through it for as long as you want it to run. I mean, on an editor or like in reality, when you're trying to put together music with pictures, you know. And then that way you can time where the pictures go. And it's hard, but if you listen to the song, you can time it to the beat on the song. And that's a really good way to cure the problem of like having trouble with an error in music. Now, I'm not even going to go into the rights, but the point is like so Stagecoach and other westerns that formed after it around drums along the Mohawk time. Stagecoach has all these accoutrements of music, of the score, the film score, but now it interacts with the dialogue, which also goes to the music in Hollywood classical cinema, that these seamless numbers were concentrated on. The music wasn't the only thing that could make the movie amazing, but that the silent film wasn't ever able to pick for everybody what score they wanted to go to was kind of the reason they invented sound. Because sound wasn't here until 1927, but there were sound machines that worked for a while. But in all this, why we did it, why we didn't before, is because Westerns would go on to have the score for everybody that they used in the movie. And now you can have the Oscars for everybody because now the best score is one that nobody knew about. Because not that they didn't know about it, they just sent to places the music they wanted to play. You can still do that with digital. But you can't like really have the music blend with the dialogue and blend with the sound effects in every movie the same way, kind of, at least in the same similar way, that you shouldn't go for the other processes because you'd have to, in the old days, you'd have to cut down every last piece of film that went with the sound, and that still makes it to where those tracks are all separated. And that's why they have the voice track, the background track, the mid-ground track, and the front track out the proscenium. Like right here, this is the proscenium. It's the fourth wall. It turns invisible, and you can see whatever is in it as a play. It's theatrical. The theatrical aspect raised its budget when the Stagecoach. The Stagecoach is unimaginably one of the most expensive films they've ever made. We've talked about it in other classes. It almost seems like we've had a class on the Western. And if we had, I don't know, because this is the thing. We talk about Westerns all the time in film class because it's a viable genre. Like, even though the Iron Horse doesn't follow all the codes of Western civilization that are leading up to that point. But, like, these are look backs at the past, and this is the best we could recreate the past. And so we don't want the feelings of the past that are outdated to come through necessarily in the film. So that's one way to direct attention to an edit job is also sound, because then you're already blending the action with the dialogue, with the background noise, with the score. And those are also 4 tracks that you have to build eventually to build the final score. And in Stagecoach, of course, this was 1939. It was branded to win an award, but that the Oscar went to Wizard of Oz. No, it was Gone with the Wind or something. And this is the same year, 1939. The dilemma of filmmakers of Hollywood was they wanted to pump in money to the machinery when they first were making, even during the Great Depression, making it look like one dinner with them would bankrupt the world, and it cheered everybody up, because they're like, if you want to bankrupt the world on one meal, go for it. I mean, that's how big stars were. And like, so they pretend to do that. And like, it's like, so in 1925, when the Iron Horse comes out, it's like, there's still these super westerns like the Covered Wagon, but there's all kinds of westerns in between that are kind of B westerns. And then John Ford's like, let's spend all this studio money we have on these studio films I was making on westerns. So now they're putting them as big budget movies because of Stagecoach. And here in 1939, the opulence reflects Gold Diggers of 1933, because the Gold Diggers of 1933 were the ones that were saying, you bought me a meal, the whole world's bankrupt, I'm out of here, and they're like, that's what we love. Even though we're poor, we shouldn't be like really delving into the sinful cinema. And that film made it past censorship really well, because they just bought their way past it. And I'm not saying that's a bad or good thing, because they're gold diggers anyway, so they must be giving themselves away. And I think that's cool, because like, if they really turned out to be gold diggers, that's cool. But what can history say? Because a bad connotation of that is someone that'll, get rid of you for their money. And I'm like, well, no, you wouldn't, because getting rid of them, what is it going to do? I never understand how even in Psycho, they always find the money that they could have only found if the victim were alive, and didn't even get a chance to tell them. I'm not saying that's a flaw with Psycho. Maybe Hitchcock was drawing attention to that for the astute viewer. Is like, if and that is if she would have known with the things that were happening before her, we know that is intentionally in there. So those ironies derived are economical, but how he finds the money is weird, because why would she count it in the hotel room? So this is something that's a why, and now we have the slasher picture, always have the chick die because something goes wrong. But I think they should try the one where my boyfriend died because something scary happened in the attic. And that'd be hilarious, because it's like, so I'm not saying Stagecoach is like the View of John Ford, but the View of John Ford is like, we're putting it big, we're driving stages through it, we're doing Covered Wagon with sound. We're pioneering, with the great pioneers of the Old West from the frontier. And the frontierism is like this, outside, before you get to the isolated wastelands of despair to the west, or whatever they're calling it, you have to travel through the dangerous parts of America. And this is a real history. Like, that was a lot more stages at once than even Covered Wagon showed. And it was a lot more people at once. And then it was like all these people that were heading to the west, even as the Civil War ended for real. And then, like, as they were reminded of the Civil War, they head west, not to get out of the north and south, but it seems they're completely occupied with people that live there. And that's the only reason they don't want anybody to just suddenly move in. And so I don't feel as though there's any way to look at these pictures and see not a cultural aspect of the time. And on the one hand, we're reminded of Grapes of Wrath and all those things that make us sad about movies that are depressing, or not really depressing, but what makes us sad is sometimes we can feel the sadness of the movie. But the Western and all the genres of Hollywood weren't really in for, the laughs and the cries like they always announce publicity. They're more into it for the human emotion that can be connected through us all, and you see it in us all. But the point of that is, Stagecoach is making this huge, huge movie, and it doesn't even reflect the human spirit that went through it, and that it was the closing of the West,
for real, by the time the Western came out, it had been like 70 years from then. And since it was 70 years from the close of the West, everything looks different through a future's point of view. I'd have hated to see the movie made at the time that it happened, if they had movies back then. But there's photographs, and some of those photographs are in like museums. And the museums that are really particular keep them there because sometimes when the public finds out about an artwork, they condemn it no matter what grounds it's on. And I'm not talking about my own personal work. I'm talking that artists have always had to live through these sort of anti-art perspectives. But then you think, well, if it's anti-art, why are they calling the Westerns non-art? Because he's saying it's entertainment, because that's how he's going to do it. So now you have the stage building across the Western as done by the genre of the B, and all you have to do to change it to an A genre is put more money into it, and really the B films that are trying to be B films will still be the exploitation, like 1933's Freaks or something, from MGM. So by the time, and that was fully wired with sound. I mean, that they did use a sound on disc system, not very long. Isn't really necessary to know, except for it was later used and is used now up to the point of transferring to digital. We still got to remember how to transfer from CDs or DVDs as filmmakers. I mean, it's impossible not to keep updated with the new material, but that doesn't mean you just like say, well, the old stuff is terrible. You say the old stuff was great, and I love that, but we got to get these digital projects together, and there's setbacks to them. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is because Westerns in the digital era, online, that are short films, especially in the realm of country music that like has a country Western video or the country Western type made movies, those are based on like contemporary cowboy like feelings, but a cowboy is different than what it used to mean in Stagecoach, except that in the Old West, a cowboy never backs down, and a cowboy has a code, and it's like they were more like gangs of like these ravaging like destroyers, and like in the movies they always have like a choices to make and a will to have, and these ideals met. But like a cowboy was like worse than a Klansman back in the day, because if you didn't have his ideals, he'd immediately kill you. Now in Sam Peckinpah's movies, you see a tip of the iceberg on this, but that you can kind of see why the edge has been taken off. Not that this is a G-rated movie, but there is a G-rated version because there's more there's more cussing in the original one they put out. But then 100 years later, you look back. This hasn't been 100 years since Stagecoach, but almost 90 years after Stagecoach, we're sitting back and going, I wonder if he said something bad here that John Ford took out on the final version of this film released. And nobody wants to hear that who's a fan of the movie, because they think the movie never changes. But to tell you the truth, when Stagecoach came out, there were probably about a dozen different versions that I can even think of. So to think that they just cut this curse words out of the copy I bought in Colorado doing adjunct work for California, I don't think they're going to add back the stuff they put out of it, but that I've seen it in the theater at USC is probably the definitive print. I'm saying that I saw a lot of these movies in the theater, and it looks different, and there's different parts used. And I don't want to tell you that just to encourage you to go, because you'll never find at USC, they'll never play the same version twice, So they're going through all 20 kinds, and everybody's going to see it. But I'm not, because I'm teaching a class on why don't get frustrated that the version has come to you. It's a real elite group. Like, I don't know what you have to do to get there, but I'm just saying, I'm not taunting you as a student. I'm just saying the things you have to go through to get a print, they would go through anyway, because they stock a library that allows the greatest print. And the greatest print sometimes means the one restored. And here we have capital entering the film. So if it was capital from the film to the film, John Ford likes it. And that's how you raise to an A. You take, because he's trying to get the money from all his films, and he has it, but he spent one after another and realizes he graduates to A filmmaking all of a sudden. So now John Ford's in the Western, so everybody wants to make a Western now. That's what every director, even the musical directors of classical Hollywood cinema, we're trying to make like I know that Showboat kind of went wrong with James Whale, but it's a beautiful movie anyway. There's some problems with it, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But that's a kind of a frontier. Let's go to unexplored, dangerous territories, and let's miss our homes, but that they're occupied by everybody that survived the Civil War. Was we shouldn't have sold their houses when that was going on for 15 years because they came and took it back, and there's laws about that continue in today's like society. Not even kidding. There's laws that conform to like not what people believe now, but like yesteryear, just because we didn't vote them out. Like if a law stays stagnant and it's proven in a movie not to work anymore, that could be a good idea that like the institution is still built on that. So maybe instead of saying they shouldn't have made this movie, maybe they should build a different institution and then we'll make a movie about that where it doesn't look totally overwrought with scum and hiveys. It's like, well, okay, the Klan was the only peaceful group we could find is now one of the messages I'm getting with Birth of a Nation because they were defending themselves. It's like I'm not trying to bag on anybody that has like those values, but most of the people that tries to like have that value too stumbles along the ground that there's other issues at stake here, like other people can get mysteriously enticed by something like this print is so rare, but these prints are in protective custody of a film. So it's like, I don't really think anyone's going to like destroy the original print of this, that, and the other. What I'm trying to say is they just, sometimes in the silent era, they didn't really see that it was going to make it in the future. And it's because of sound and everything that they didn't think it was going to make it into the future. And that's kind of a sad thing, except for that Hitchcock wired sound for blackmail, and there was sound in the film before, but he wanted to release the silent film still because he was in Great Britain where silent film transitioned later. He was kind of the one that sold the whole view on silent film becoming sound film because he showed that both versions work. And that you still have to time your images together regardless of the sound at first, but the sound gives you a technique to match it later. Doesn't mean you don't have to go from one timeline to another and then plow through the visuals and then put the audio on and then connect them to the audio, because otherwise you're squeezing the whole thing, and you don't want to squeeze the whole thing in because then it'll run really fast in a slow zone. On your editing capability, you can do these things, and then you add the 4 tracks, you burn them down to 1, and then you add that to the timeline. And now why I'm giving this away is because that's pretty much what they did on Stagecoach. And they were already making sound films in the studios. Westerns were a B Western till then, but that's because John Wayne comes out. Now that John Wayne is this megastar in the business that totally knocked down doors and threw them into their kind, an old school cowboy, like what they were saying even as back as the silent era, is a pretty bad guy. But the cattle rustlers were worse. And now in Westerns today, they never explain the difference. And even Sam Peckinpah never explained the difference. But there's no real trace of what the original intention was, but I think there's something bad to it, like beyond worse, that I just don't go exploring. I don't really, if somebody's got something to hide and they're not hiding it from me, I'm like, well, it's not going to bother me even if that was the case, because why would I let it? Why would I let something bother me that already happened in history? If it already happened in history, then I'm going to find out about it. And I don't have to there's these things going around where you bum rush the phone, or somebody's trying to, say this or that about what you should do, and you're bum rushing for the phone. It's always one of those things that you wonder if there's like these anticlimactic devices that tell us that like these are not the things to memorize, but the titles and the actors are. But the thing is, with this program in Western, we see this vast frontier, and we see that everyone exploring it is fighting each other. The Native Americans were trying to get out of there before everybody fought with each other, and then they got enslaved in the Mexican-American War right after the Civil War. This is one of the reasons they're going west, because they have to get south to Texas. This is not a pretty picture. But in the covered wagon in 1920 and 1915, the covered wagon, they have all these trails of these stagecoaches, and yeah, in most movies except the covered wagon, there were Native Americans shown as like the ones chasing them down. That they sold toys like this in the in Macy's or Gumballs or the old what the mall used to be everywhere. That they sold toys of cowboys and Indians. I don't think that's really what a real cowboy looked like, the ones from the frontier. And I don't think that's what a real Native American or Indian looked like in that time. And I'm not condemning the toys. I'm just like, today they should at least make the toys look like the people really are. And if Native Americans still want to be turned into a toy, don't turn them into a toy. Remember that old debate? It gets real, you get real engendered with liberal criticism, so you can answer no. Either way you answer that isn't going to cause someone to just, rouse to the situation. Oh, well, now that I know the conspiracy, I'm totally scared of it. So one of the things you've got to think about with John Ford is like, okay, I'm in this Hollywood classical cinema. I've already made these commanding films. I'm going back to the Western. I'm thinking these guys, Orson Welles, this new avant-garde filmmaker, really wants me to make it so he can see how to make his film. And that it's going to be A-list, and that Citizen Kane was an A-list movie is one of those things we forget about, because Citizen Kane cost a lot less than Stagecoach, because 1939 was a bonanza. It was the end of the Depression, and since everyone had been keeping the money of their fans in Hollywood, the only thing that comes to mind is like that whole Grapes of Wrath after Stagecoach kind of thing. It's like the Stagecoach came first, and then it was Grapes of Wrath in the history, just like in those two movies side by side. The Stagecoach is not a book by Steinbeck, who wrote Grapes of Wrath. But Grapes of Wrath is pretty good, but it's not really a Western. See, that divides the pioneers of the West with the pioneers of today. They were so poor that they had to go west to California and find a job. But here these guys are still parked from where they first came in to Texas and below to fight the Mexican-American War. So these Westerns have those in them, but that's not a program that's like agenda'd regularly, although many critics talk about Westerns. Lindsay Anderson says Westerns are the best genre because if they have a way to get what they need, they get it and they need it. That's what Stagecoach is, get it and need it. I need a stagecoach, I need a crazy cowboy, and by crazy, I mean cool guy that's going to kick the crap out of everyone that even eyes his woman. And I'm like, well, that's not even as dangerous as the old version of cowboy they're telling me, but they don't want me to know what that is. But the point is that the cattle rustlers are the worst of the cowboys. And so in the Westerns of movies, they kind of did find the fact that some cowboys actually did run out the cattle rustlers. So they're not like just a member of like a knock 'em down, bang 'em up gang that's a cult. Because by the time you get to the silent films where they're showing cowboys, there's this thing about like kind of that's when the word came about for cinema, was in the silent era, like most words that were in the cinema. But cowboy for Harry Carey Jr. was kind of emotional. I mean, you felt for him, not really when he got shot or whatever, but when he was shooting back and he missed, or when it's kind of a low take on how much energy you can get from watching this. But that's the whole point, is they're giving him kind of a light suffering, laying back edge, but he's still shooting at this guy. So it's kind of what they're going for. They're like, I don't think he's shooting at you, is kind of what they're saying, because in the Great Train Robbery, he shoots over here. And these are kind of indifferent implications that you can just watch the movie and just have it wave over you. And it's something you do even when you don't have to. You can let the silent film kind of wave over your brain. And so the Iron Horse gets to be really potentially one of the biggest Westerns of the time. In 1925. And this is before the Great Depression. Now this is where they're still going west, but they're copying the story, and the Civil War has still devastated things 50 years later. Not really, because now we're in the modern era with cameras being used that are higher tech, and the whole time I'm telling you this is they're in an office with a computer, okay? No, I'm just saying, like, the producers and everybody else who are watching this be made or seeing the clips getting made are assembling it and putting it out the way the studio would want it. And that kind of technique was going on even in 1925. So if you look at the silent era, they just didn't have to spend as much to make more because they had to until they got to the sound dilemma, which was only backlogged by, 22 years because the French had it earlier on, probably because they had the earlier machines. But the thing I don't understand about the theory is not all pioneers represent history. Most of them don't. But if they do, at least they can fight battles with those that threaten them. And in these movies, they're showing that the things are threatening them, but it seems like an idle command to let us not threaten them or do threaten them, because the whole stagecoach is under siege when the Native Americans fire the arrows at them. And I don't think the whole stagecoach was under siege because not everyone wanted to kill the natives in that stagecoach. And he was just like, just keep running through. If they kill you, let them go. Because that's the way this normally is. So now these cowboys are not so great for gunning them down because if they didn't throw a spear at the right time, which is already racist, right? It would have knocked over the stagecoach, and those that weren't fighting him would have been saved. And that was a scene they took out. The Indian comes up to him. He's like, I had to throw that at you because otherwise I wouldn't have stopped your stage. And he's like a member of the community in the Western. So now with political correctness, it's gone the wrong way, and they've cut out all the hard-to-take scenes out of the old movies. And I'm not saying that it was TCM, because TCM has an edgy version, but it's softer than the hard version, and that's what I'm getting at. To each his own. But in the versions I saw with the Native American that talks to him after he stopped the stage, he joins them in the stagecoach, and then later almost gets killed, and John Wayne gives him an ointment. Now raise your hand if you're terrified as hell that I just said that. Because none of us remember that it wasn't really TCM or AMC or censorship or political correctness. It was the scenes that seemed out of date. Now, that was no fault of the cinema maker. Some of those scenes weren't meant to be in and got spliced back in, and some feel as though they're making it up. But the original script has way more wild stuff that they probably filmed and didn't use. So it might be a special edition that's a rare collector's item because they can't keep striking prints from it, and they don't trust any system to do that. And they would just go unknown. So it's not really a wild goose chase to see how you can get the most out of a print. That's what I was getting at. So we've looked at all this extra added theory, and then we're thinking, how do we know that wasn't a TV show that added that scene? And a lot of times when scenes are added, then someone is interested in interesting things to watch. Because that's not really the job of the TV broadcaster necessarily, but it is now with cable. But back then it's they want to show the most quality they can, the highest top of the line, and the number one thing they can. But they're willing to send a broadcast signal. And and here's the irony: radio stations were already sending those broadcast signals, and by the time radio stations were doing that, then cinema's well, now we know we can do that. So this whole thing about live and filmed live and everything, you got to watch that in the notes if you're restoring the movie. Because if you're restoring a movie, you need to know what parts go in. That somebody may restore the part that was censored could actually be what was happening there. And 3, it was weird because the Native American, the Indian, was still, that they call him in the movie, was still looking as though he was the racist kind, where they have the feathers coming out, and they totally don't want to be on film because they're going to wear red face, which is just as bad as blackface. And yet, so we're liking this movie, though, because of the action, and I still love Stagecoach. I'm not saying it's a really racist movie. All Westerns kind of have that ability. Some are worse, and some that examine it seem interesting. But about nowadays, when they examine, whether the Native Americans are there or not, but there's no real appearance of them in movies because they didn't like the way other actors that weren't Native Americans played them in movies. And though they gave tips, and though some of them were on the set, they didn't feel they meant it will swallow our soul only because they're going to have to sell out to be in this. And if they sell out, then they're back on Buffalo Bill's team. Now, it's all not so grim because the Native Americans were in trouble for dying. Some people argued that they wouldn't have died if everybody hadn't owned them as slaves during the Civil War after the African Americans were released. And now we're going, didn't they all die of exploitative labor? But that cinema was a lot easier than exploitive. They weren't where they wanted to go, but they were still desperate to go there. But to eat a nice fancy meal with a white guy and make fun of him in your own language? Yeah, but there's no movie about that, because then it's like, well, now we're mad at them and want to re-enslave them. See what I'm getting at? Like, this is not the colonial behavior that these Westerns are really having. In fact, John Wayne becomes very noble, and he's like looking at Claire Trevor, this great Hollywood actress, and her name was listed above his in the original credits, above John Wayne. And it's a John Ford movie, and he's Claire Trevor explains to him in this speech that, and I think it is the uncensored version, and she's talking about how she's a call girl at this casino back in the city of Tombstone or something, and she's got to get to Fort Danger or whatever, and it's this kind of made up MacGuffin of a fort that you just see them traveling in the stagecoach the whole time, and when they depart, they're all asking who should go, and it's a bunch of criminals. And they bring a banker, they bring a card sharp, and they bring 2 women that want to get married, and then they pick up the outlaw John Wayne randomly, and they're all in it together. So the fact that it's a cool movie right off the offset, because now I've upset you by the fact that there's one with a Native American, and we all want to see it. But just keep in mind, we do want to see it even though his headdress looks that way, because we want to see where we came up with the idea that we've ever seen a Native American in this generation anyway. But that it's a real Native American that I've seen a couple of times is real rare, and suddenly that leads you all to anguish that there's still some on the planet. But I'm sure that because they could try to buy them out, is one of those things where it's like, that doesn't mean that everybody has to stop gambling just because Native Americans have the best casinos. So, because that'd be like, well, they do it too, so we shouldn't. I mean, there's some cultural imperialism that really will knock you out of intellectual circle. And it's like if you talk about how you side with the Old West being savage toward the Indians, Native Americans is what I'm saying, but we've been inundated to say Indians because in the Westerns they're Indians. This doesn't mean to change the soundtrack, because now we're having a harder time doing what we should have done and released it as the movie that had the soundtrack open, or what we did since the independent movement came the Hollywood big thing with Pulp Fiction and all those classes I was teaching before, all the way back to Griffith. This is a saving moment where she announces who she is and you find out she's a call girl, and he still marries her anyway. Doesn't even tell her so this saves the movie. Because now you're thinking this is not sexist all of a sudden, because he's like, yeah, but she was worth it all. And I'm out of here. And I'm just going to just tether me to her. I killed everybody. I freaking killed everybody. And now here I am at the end of the Western, and the chick still likes me. I don't care if she's a call girl. Hell, that's the best. That's not even lowering yourself in my book. So John Wayne does actually become noble through a speech like that at the end of the movie that totally we still need, but because he's gruff and tough by our today's standards doesn't mean his early movies. And why did they package his early movies that were B movies anyway if they couldn't even restore his scenes that weren't sexist? So that one I'm gonna have to check on. Maybe I'm blaming the wrong person, but it just seems like in the original when we were kids, and that wasn't added for sugarcoating. He was like, damn, I'm going to take I don't want to say a word like that, but I'm going to take my blank out to the mall and see if she catches a few guys while I explain that's my blank. See, you could do that and really mean it without being ridiculed in society by being joking about it. You can actually, it's not just an attitude to have, it's an attitude to want. Like, it's like, man, if my girl was free, I'd be with her all the time. That kind of sounds sexist, but that's not what I'm saying. It's like he's saying, you know what? She can do what he wants. I'm going with her because she didn't condemn me to the death penalty. And she's the only one who did that. There's a lot of ways to look at that, but it's not sugar coated. Because she's totally, throughout the stagecoach, hypnotized him with her eyes to just think about her and nothing but her. And that they did real techniques at Warner Brothers to hypnotize people, I'm not going to mention because I don't know how to do their type of hypnosis. Maybe I could say a word that would start it, but probably not. So, anyway, we have 10 more minutes of class, and I'm still thinking there's a few things we missed about Stagecoach. So now that they've got the sound, they've got the exploding of the gun noise. This is an advantage because in the sound film, when they couldn't time it, nobody knew guns had a sound effect. Or did they? Were they all silenced back in the day? No. Silent era was not silenced like your silent pistols or silence your gun. It's silent only into the objective of what they build the sound in each theater to sound like with the silent film. That's why some there were great orchestras and some it was just a keyboard player. Now, the music was still there, but they couldn't really do sound effects. So if you're shooting a gun, you're going to know it's a gun because it makes a noise. But in the silent era, nobody really knew if guns made a noise or not, right? No, they knew that. Everyone had guns around the whole place. It's not Hollywood that invented guns. It's not like them that said, we're going to put guns in a movie because we don't want them in. Or and I'm not saying that's a bad thing because all these gun clubs are like, well, subscribe only to us because we're the only gun club. And I'm like, you're the only gun club, then how do I become my only gun club and call you out with Baltic Avenue? It's like the only gun club. Well, if it was the only gun club, why do we go to war in the first place? It wasn't mine. I like guns in movies, but sorry, I like guns in movies. Guns, cigarettes, like in Stagecoach, they're blowing smoke everywhere. Everybody's getting hit by the secondhand smoke. And, he's got a gun. They're shooting out the window. A couple of guys fall off their horse, probably wasn't jumping off, so the rest of them wouldn't get shot. Right? It's like, zoom in closer. We're all cheering when we were kids for these cowboys to just thwomp the Indians. But if the real makers of that toy even put the Indians out, the Indians can win, but that's how you lose. And I didn't like that game as a kid because if the Indians won, then Fort Apache wouldn't have that stitchy ending on it. I don't know. I mean, it's like these political correct guys take out everything from the movie, then you can't defend anyone. You're like, if they took out the scene from this movie, Unforgiven, which is kind of independent, then maybe they felt it went too far for their society. But then you're looking back and say, why is it when the society got more relaxed, a lot of those things about old movies were edged off? Like the scene where Claire Trevor's walking in the distance forever, looking for the fence that's jagged by his house. And it's kind of foreshadowing what they're driving to, loneliness and desperation by themselves in it. And I think that the Walden message that's given to Westerns is totally missed here. Because none of these guys are transcending. They're trying to be in a movie. John Wayne's in a movie. You got to remember, he's an actor doing these things because that's what he's told to do. And so he does that because he's a good actor. Westerns still work like that today. They still ask you how to be, but there was nothing in that B-roll that was violent or too nauseous of language. And it actually explained a few things that I was just trying to explain. So maybe they could go back and uncensor it, but at the time, they didn't know anything about those issues, so they cut them out. Or did they? Because if they didn't know anything about those issues, why'd they get cut out? Because they were in there already. Now, hang on. I'm a little confused because now we're all going looking for the valuable print again, and I don't want to get into that. It could be in, I'm not even going to say where it is. But students, take heed. There is more Westerns to come. And the people that are laughing in the background are totally faking it, dude. They're totally faking it. But I just had to say that because if they're watching this right now, then they tried to add their own soundtrack and make a gunshot go off. That was just a door slamming. I'm just messing with you. Well, there's one more thing I've got to wrap up with about sound film. It did eventually save the Western because in Unforgiven, you got to think that the sound effects of the gun going off are the total cause of alarm for all of us when we've been already resensitized to see the fact that these guns are lethal. The guns are lethal didn't really come around until Unforgiven. Now, Unforgiven's a milestone in that way. So that we're going to talk more about the modern Western, and it isn't so bad when you think about it, but it's grimy and greasy, and it's what it really was. But they're still not as dangerous as the old West really was. But Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and Wild Bunch are the two films that seem to be as bad as the situation was. That's like the Apocalypse Now thing. Is this as bad as the real situation that happened? And those are historical contexts. And you got to realize to defend the Western, they have these themes going through the Western that if you kind of soften the blow, you can still deliver the hard blow. And by what I'm saying is you kind of add a conflict, add another conflict, add another conflict, and then crescendo in the amount of conflicts with most genres. That you kind of have waves with the musical because you're going up to the song is the end of the song is the climax, and then kind of the silences of the musical is the switching of tracks. We talked about that. So just remember that Unforgiven wouldn't have gotten so many of its scenes in if it had been a silent film. So you got to remember that silent films aren't to blame for not always having the historical context, because in reality we're only getting these messages now that this is the way they were. And in David Bordwell's film Art, he explains that arrow thing, that like the Native Americans weren't the only ones firing at them, and they were probably killing their own people that were fighting for them, and how clumsy that was. And they could have done that in the Old West, but they edged off the scenes that did that, not by today's standard, but because they had those issues and nobody was ready to talk about them. So that kind of waters it down for today. You're like, well, this Western's a lot less edgy. They're like, if they would have added the things, those would have pissed me off, but that they were trying to go for social critique in Hollywood is similar to saying Warner Brothers did social critiques, like eventually published Citizen Kane, and Stagecoach was some of the budget of that movie went into Orson Welles building a theater in his backyard and watching nothing but Stagecoach, which John Ford didn't think he was tricking him. He knew he wanted to see it 100 times to make Citizen Kane. So now we're thinking there may have been a social critique in it, but it seems like it's gone. Well, maybe it's still there behind the scenes. Because the Western still takes images that are all taken from the culture. And though behind the scenes you're kind of seeing, yeah, they are kind of bumbling it with the Native Americans, if you look at it carefully. And like you are kind of making John Wayne mad for still shooting out the window. And he's going to shoot you if you don't stop, and he shoots you, and it doesn't kill you. But eventually those three guys he lays down straight shooting style, and he jumps on the ground at the end when he gets to Lloydsburg and they get off. It does show them to get off the stagecoach. It shows him and Claire Tovar. They're thinking about taking the money they got from the stagecoach thing that they got paid for driving across the frontier, and then they're going to go find a dark and lonely house. And but they don't say that in the movie, but it's like they've graduated, they've seen lot at lot, they've seen these films at cinema clubs, like John Ford used to go to the cinema club with Alfred Hitchcock, and they'd seen something like Lot at Lot, where they go to, it's like, meet me in the empty, lonely house, It's not like that when, it's like, this one's like, meet me in the small, empty, but it's moving on water, so at least something's moving. And I'm not saying that's a depressing movie, but that emotions are viewed different from the foreign countries' views, and the Native Americans are in some movies, but they probably don't want to be because they said they never wanted to be. So I don't know. Maybe it's someone they sent that, I don't know, just can ham it up, because you can tell that those films were kind of dated because they were hamming it up. But it was the first time they tried to play cast members from the race they were, and then they found out why they weren't supposed to do that. The other race didn't want them to. So now we got all kinds of problems. That's why it's cool that, like, John Ford never really, he made a Cheyenne Autumn, though, to apologize for it all. And there's your Apocalypse Now for John Ford, because John Ford actually uses actual Native Americans that they don't want to be in it. This time they do. Not like Fort Apache, where they didn't want to, and then they said it was an okay movie until they botched the ending. This time it had to be the approval of the Native American Consulate of the United States of film that was formed. And what movie? The movie is Stagecoach, and no, the Formula Cheyenne Autumn, 1964 Cheyenne Autumn by John Ford. It's the one where it's about the Trail of Tears, and there's nothing racist in it, and it's totally beautiful, and it shows the studio may have had their hand on him being the one that's making some of these westerns corny or too much defeat. But I don't know, because when that movie came out, it was like the Cheyenne Autumn. It was in 19, maybe later 69 or it was 68. And it was called Cheyenne Autumn, and I've seen it from Netflix, and it's one you can't miss. It's like the Apocalypse Now of Native American movies. That it's a little dated, I don't think it. That's about as dated as Lawrence of Arabia is dated. If those Bridge on the River Kwai's not dated. If he put his whole money into a giant Native American thing, it's only the tip of the iceberg on how we can compete to help out those that have been disembarked from our journey because of the things that we do. And we tell them not to. So Cheyenne Autumn, because there was a film consulate, they brought together the Native Americans of all over, and there was about 20 of them left. And John Ford did not pull a Buffalo Bill. You can tell by the movie he cared about them. He didn't mean for Fort Apache to get so effed up. And he's ready to make one. And he let them direct it and just walked in there with a camera at the end and said it was John Ford. And what's weird about it is there's a lot of hammy dialogue, like from the Searchers and like from Cheyenne Autumn, where it sounds like the woman's being like over emphatic about really enjoying these Western surroundings. But in this one, she doesn't even want to be a school teacher because it's too hard, because she just saw her Indian friend get lynched. That her Indian friend didn't get lynched, that was what the film consulate was making it for, was if any of them die, from a death that's abusive. And that didn't happen. There wasn't a conspiracy theory about it. I'm sure in some like weird redneck point of view, it's like, oh no, someone became famous that's a Native American, It's like, is that a problem? Like, you were playing one a minute ago and said you didn't mind. So to get down to the nitty gritty, Native Americans are in films now. They do trust the people they work with. And even if they'd made effed up movies in the past, they showed them how it was going to look. When they showed them how it was going to look, they got to put their input into it, and that was when they directed it. But that they wanted John Ford to take credit so he could show the world about Native Americans. Let's hear it for him, right? I established to you that all Westerns were racist, and then there's the Apocalypse Now of Westerns, Cheyenne Autumn. We'll talk later.